Good afternoon. This is the CMMC Zero to CMMC Compliance in 30 Days webinar from TekStream. My name is Bruce Johnson, and I've got a couple of people joining me today to talk about CMMC compliance in the context of the CMMC compliance solution from Splunk. And maybe I'll introduce each of us in turn. As I mentioned, my name is Bruce Johnson. I'm the Director of Enterprise Security for TekStream. Our team does everything Splunk and everything security and compliance. We are doers for Splunk, and we provide services for admin on demand, for sourcing Splunk resources, for support, outsourcing, everything having to do with Splunk. If you need it, we're able to provide it. So soup to nuts kind of solution ownership, if you will. Next is Jason Trollinger. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jason Trollinger, the CIO of NPR Associates. And we met TekStream probably in late 2019 while we were looking for a solution provider to help us leverage our Splunk instance for CMMC compliance. And we've done an engagement with TekStream earlier this spring, and things are going well and looking forward to do some more business with them, but also wanted to give you some idea of what our compliance challenges are at NPR and what our journey looks like for CMMC compliance related to Splunk.
That's awesome, Jason. Thank you. Next, Paul Jeffrey. Paul.
Sure thing. Yes, my name is Paul Jeffrey. I'm the senior sales engineers on our virtual SE team here at Splunk. So I'm also the NIST and CMMC compliance expert for my team. So I help a lot of DoD contractors adopt Splunk to help help achieve their CMMC levels from a technology standpoint. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Paul. I'm just noticing I'm the only one on this call that really looks like COVID has done a number on them. I'm sporting my COVID rough here. Let's get into kind of the agenda as what we're going to cover. We've got 40 to 45 minutes together. We want to kind of talk about background of CMMC. We want to talk a little bit about how NPR is approaching the problem. We want to talk a little bit about Splunk, specifically the Splunk solution and what the Splunk platform brings to CMMC, because it is fairly unique. And then we want to talk a little bit about our approach to the problem and maybe allow some time for some questions. Practical implications: if you're listening to this webinar or viewing this webinar, you're likely within the defense industrial base in the overall supply chain for the Department of Defense, and presumably you've been dealing with some NIST challenges over the past year, at least since 2018, I should say. Obviously, the CMMC solution is based on NIST controls, and there's an awful lot of overlap. We have some links on our side, that is to say the TekStream side, for compliance relative to CMMC. Splunk has much of the same, and obviously if you're in the DIB and you're a contractor or subcontractor, you've been dealing with some of the challenges in terms of CMMC compliance and its evolution over the past year or so. I think it came out, last year or early 2020, and obviously some of the standards are still being firmed up, particularly around what it takes to be a C3PAO and what it takes to be an auditor and attestation. So, there are plenty of sources, including ACQ, that has the spreadsheets that relate, I believe, the 171 standards to CMMC. So there's a ton of sources out there, and Google is your friend. In terms of how CMMC differs from prior NIST 171 frameworks, obviously there's an overlap. And for a lot of clients, the compliance framework starts with NIST 171. So, for a lot of people that want to build to CMMC, that's a decent starting point. Hopefully it's something that you've been dealing with. The biggest challenges, though, aren't necessarily in the overlap of controls and what would be termed practices in the context of CMMC. The biggest challenges are attestation. Obviously, the DoD was not super happy with cybersecurity under NIST because there was the concept of self-attestation, and now they're really giving it teeth. The practical implication is whether or not you're compliant and you've met attestation in the context of a contract. So, why CMMC? Obviously, there are contracts reportedly coming out this year, as early as October, I guess, is what I heard earlier. Paul, I don't know what you see in terms of the timeline from your perspective. I know, Jason, you're going to be talking a little bit about the contract challenges and the timing for NPR. But there are contracts, RFPs, RFIs that are coming out reportedly this year with CMMC requirements. And certainly by the time you've seen a contract that you qualify for, it's a little bit late. So, I know that the end date is 2025, but that's not the date that most of our customers are targeting. It's really this year as to when people are taking advantage of it. And to be honest, with 300,000 customers in the DIB, 200 to 300 customers, 1,000 customers, the number obviously fluctuates depending upon who you're talking to. But an awful lot of people in the DIB, and almost everyone is hitting it now. So we're seeing a significant uptick in terms of customers coming to us and coming to Splunk to help, in that compliance journey. So the other kind of requirement that you'll see a lot of is how you view allowable cost in the context of CMMC. We're going to talk a little bit about that and in terms of taking advantage of that. And then kind of we want to focus a little bit on our approach to CMMC because it is very different from traditional approaches to CMMC. In terms of the progression across CMMC levels, you'll see this view a lot from almost any vendor in terms of the levels of CMMC and how many practices are in each level. What we've seen is the vast majority of people, estimated 85% of the DIB, is going to be targeting level 3. Although I will say that is changing a little bit when we start talking to customers that are taking advantage of the solutions that we're providing. There is, with the allowable cost model, if you're familiar with that, it's the fact that the DoD has published, has acknowledged the expense, if you will, of getting CMMC compliant because it involves certainly an investment, not just on compliance, but the underlying security tools. So they've allowed for some provisions to charge back the expense of the investment back to the DoD. And I've heard various figures. Originally, it was like $125K, but there are estimates out there for what that allowable cost model will tolerate. And a lot of our customers have different views on allowable cost and how they're going to charge that back to DoD, but it's certainly something to consider. And under that model, then there's some customers that are looking actually to do level 4, even level 5 in the short term. Obviously, leveling up is an incremental thing. So, what we put in place in terms of the solution leveraging Splunk, even though we're targeting 130 controls, typically within level 3, you can see that it's a very incremental jump from level 3 to level 4. To be honest, everything that we do at each level of certification in terms of a solution allows us to very incrementally and layer on technology and layer in practices to get to the next level. And so the jump from level 1 to level 3 is pretty dramatic, but the subsequent jumps from level 3 to level 4 and level 5 are actually very incremental. So turning on the controls really isn't terribly hard. If we'll look at the solution in a minute, but it's not terribly hard, and it's something that we can do pretty quickly by layering on another technology. And Paul will talk about the technologies according to levels, but layering on another technology and then turning on those additional controls is actually a pretty incremental jump from 3 to 4 to 5. With that, I will hand it over to my friend Jason. Jason, you want to talk a little bit about CMMC and how NPR is viewing it, how you're approaching it?
Definitely. Thanks, Bruce. So NPR, we're a professional services / engineering / solutions provider working in the energy and nuclear markets, the federal market, which is where the CMMC requirements come from, and the health and life sciences market. And for us, because of those disparate industries that we work in, there's cybersecurity requirements from different standards, different organizations, and it's not just those organizations. There's also the partner ecosystem, which is we're an entity, and then we have our clients and our vendors, and within that, we're sharing information, accessing each other's systems more than ever before, and trust is not really an option. You have to have some sort of verification that people are meeting cybersecurity requirements and they're doing their due diligence, and that's where these standards come from, but there's a whole bunch of them. And for us, we're at NPR, we're trying to manage flexibility with security because we could completely lock the whole place down and nobody will get anything done, and that's not what we want to do. We want to figure out the right levels of security to apply so that our engineers can still be flexible, get their job done, but we're also achieving better cybersecurity. And of course, just like everyone else, right? We're doing more with less, and we're working remotely. So we've all taken it seemed like we stopped what we were doing regarding working for compliance, cybersecurity compliance, so we could go and turn our companies into basically or convert our employees to a remote workforce. So we've taken that break from compliance, and then we're learning and doing. There's a lot of different systems, there's different standards, there's different tools, and we're learning while we're doing. And in the NPR model, we desire to manage these solutions on our own. We're going to be the ones who are taking them and managing them. So we find partners to work with who can help us bring those solutions to fruition, but then we're kind of the ones who are taking them over. So for us, there's a lot of learning and doing going on while we're achieving compliance. And this compliance challenge, and we've seen it in multiple different client contracts, and it may not be one particular standard. It could be maybe it's what the CSO of the client is, or what's important to that CSO. But we've seen ISO, we've seen the Center for Internet Security's critical security controls. There's NIST, so we've been working on NIST 800-171, and then CMMC came out. It was fall of last year, spring fall of last year, that came out. And we settled on CMMC because we're working on the NIST 800 compliance already, and that is really pretty much all of CMMC is NIST. There's some more controls and things, but that's basically the gist of it. And there is a deadline associated with it. It's mid-October when CMMC is going to be coming out into RFPs. I think in the summer, or probably right about now, it should be coming out in RFIs. But in the RFPs, it's mid-October. And once those come out, they're kind of going to do it on a rolling basis. So over the next 5 years, where all the contracts with CUI will have CMMC in it. But it's a case where because it's on a rolling basis, you don't necessarily know if it's going to be one of your contracts or something your business would want to bid on. So it's necessary to go ahead and just get the compliance out of the way so you don't have to worry about it in the future. And CMMC is going to meet a lot of the requirements for other standards. And so the tools that we're implementing for CMMC, those are going to apply across the board. And it should make, once we've got our CMMC audit done, compliance to other standards will be much easier. So we have our challenge, and is kind of how, going back to our relationship with TekStream, kind of how that started. We had tools to implement and gaps to close, and we're resource challenged. And we actually spent some time at the end of last year looking for a silver bullet. We had heard there's tools out there which you can get your next generation antivirus, you can get your auditing and logging, and you can get vulnerability management, and the tools exist. But those tools, which are FedRAMP moderate don't really exist. And we vetted a lot of vendors. And I know there's some they're kind of coming online and they're pushing to get there, but CMMC is October, and we got to a point where it's like, okay, we can't get this silver bullet, and so we're going to have more, we would like to have had the least amount of tools as possible, but we had our Splunk instance, which we were using for client security requirements. We have log retention requirements, and we said, hey, we need somebody who can help us build this out for CMMC compliance, and then eventually we take it over in-house. And we wanted to get that foundation in place because we're feeding a lot of cybersecurity related data into Splunk. So we need to get that in, and then we can start feeding data to it. And so we did. It was an aggressive delivery, which we were working with TekStream. We had said, hey, we want to get this done quickly, at least get it stood up so we can start taking over management, and then down the road, we'll see. There may be further on engagements as we get closer to make sure we've got this thing tied up. And so if I share some lessons that we learned from the experiences, one is find a partner with broad experience in Splunk and CMMC, the CMMC module, which we found at TekStream was able to work with us, leverage that experience, and engage them early on Splunk specifications. So one thing we found out, we had begun working with TekStream, found out that the previous way we had built out our Splunk instance for log retention was not robust enough to work for what we needed for CMMC. And so there's some background hardware updating and things we had to do to leverage the CMMC solution. And then also, I'd recommend completing the Splunk Fundamentals 1 course, to have your sysadmins complete that. That way, when you have the experts come in, that everyone's speaking the same language. I think that helps a lot. And prior to engaging, hopefully with TekStream, right? Prior to engaging with TekStream, that you've selected the data sources that you're going to need for ingestion into Splunk based on your cybersecurity requirements, and looking at the implementation process. How are you going to go about working the engagement? And so getting those things taken care of allows TekStream to come in and streamline the process. And it's, the title of this, I think, is CMMC compliance within 30 days. And in order to do that, you have to have your homework done. And then once all that's done, you execute. And then I'm sure there's plenty of other tools and things that you have to work on besides Splunk. So you can use that extra time for that. So looking forward, especially for us at NPR, right, we want to maintain these solutions in-house. So having that partner relationship for us is not just necessary, but it's critical so that we can go and reach back out if we need to, if we have questions, et cetera, because like I said, we're going to be managing it in-house. And Splunk, I know Paul Jeffrey from Splunk's coming up after me here, and I think he'll probably tell us that, and what we've heard is it's a journey. Splunk's a journey. It's continuous improvement, and we're constantly moving forward and learning. And I don't know if there is a finish line. I'm not sure if it exists, but we have not seen it. For us, like our security process, that's another thing where there's probably no finish line either, right? We're consistently refining and never truly done. And at some point, when we get the CMMC level 3 out of the way, there's a potential that we may be looking at it for me. That's definitely a differentiator in the marketplace. If you're thinking about 85% of companies are doing level 3, and I think you said, I think your size was 5% going for a 4, so that's definitely an advantage. All right, and for that, I will turn it over to Paul Jeffrey from Splunk. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Bruce. So just to recap, I am one of the senior engineers here at Splunk, and I'm one of the few NIST and CMMC experts for the team. And again, I do work with, historically, I've worked a ton with our tier 1 defense contractors like your Lockheed Martins, Northrop Grumman's, Raytheons, et cetera. And those organizations, they use Splunk everywhere, not just for security or compliance, but also to do IT operations as well. So the reason why I mention that is if you look at it from the Splunk overview perspective, we like to think of Splunk as your data platform, right? So regardless of where your data lives or what hats they wear, it'll provide insights and answers to a lot of their questions and situations. So, for something like this, Splunk is a software company, so we do provide, the software packages to be installed anywhere. So you can do that on-prem in your local data centers. You can put that in your cloud environments like Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and deploy it there as well. So it's super flexible in that regard. And with our licensing model, which is ingest-based, we actually don't care how many Splunk servers you have. I've been in certain situations or certain client environments where there might be, several Splunk servers or several dozen or more. And they can be geographically dispersed for high availability and performance reasons as well. What I've also found, especially working with a lot of defense contractors, is moving towards cloud. So Splunk does provide a cloud service for Splunk Cloud as a SaaS model. So of course, in that model, we own the systems, the hardware, and the customer responsibility is just to send the data to the cloud environment. We also have Splunk Cloud FedRAMP as well. But I think I've run into maybe one or two clients that in the defense contractor space actually were required to have a FedRAMP environment. So we do provide that as well too for it. So we also provide other tertiary features as well, such as our AI and ML capabilities as well. So these are free toolkits. We have our machine learning toolkit and our deep learning toolkit that can be applied onto this, on top of this as well. So, if you have folks in your organizations that do data science or want to use machine learning or deep learning to look at your data, you're free to do so with that. So it gives you a massive advantage because a lot of that, those tools are very complicated to use and they can be very costly as well. But those are free add-ons that we provide with Splunk as well. Bruce, next slide, please. Okay. So I talked about a data platform. And what that means is that Splunk has a unique ability to ingest data from practically any data source, right? So whether it's a Windows machine, Linux, syslog off network gear, such as firewalls, router switches, wireless controllers, you throw that all in there, right? One of our other unique abilities is to pull data from APIs as well. Splunk does support natively the REST API, and everything's all Python based. So if you need to pull data from, let's say, Azure or Microsoft 365, AWS, to get those audit logs, right? Because you don't own those anymore, right? They're not on-prem. So to pull that data down, we do have native connectors for those, so we can pull that information in so you can start to tell the whole story. So we do have a lot of folks that run in multi-cloud environments that might have, Azure AD, Microsoft 365 for their employees, but they may have assets for their line of business in, let's say, AWS. So being able to bring all of that into a single pane of glass into one data platform is, extraordinarily valuable for them, right? It saves them a lot of time and money and efforts all around. So from a security perspective in CMMC, right, what we need to be able to do from a cybersecurity perspective is to bring all those data sources into a single focal point to do analysis from the cybersecurity side of our process. Right? CMMC is very different from DFARS or RMF or other compliance frameworks in the industry. Right? That effectively is just collect this data and look at it this way, and that's it. Right? So admittedly, level 1 and 2 of CMMC speaks to that, right, from DFARS perspective. But when you start to look at level 3, where everybody, well, for the most part, will need to be and above, it's about process, right? So now they're dictating you need to look at it this way and act on it, right, up to your discretion, but it's about process. So you'll find that with CMMC, it's all about the SOPs and SSPs all around. So that paperwork, those processes need to be either built from scratch if they don't exist today. They need to be enhanced for CMMC, and then also just sharpened up in general, right? So what we're trying to do in Splunk for all CMMC customers is to, obviously, the data source perspective. We collect all that data regardless of where it is and put it in a very easy to understand manner within that. So we do have a CMMC app that Bruce will showcase here in a little bit that was built at Splunk and can be deployed to any Splunk installation. This is now the focal platform for all Splunk users at this point. So we do threat hunting, looking at information at scale, right? So when any cybersecurity incidents that happen, number one, it needs to be able to be collected, correlated, understood very quickly. So level 3, we're going to provide our enterprise security product to do that. And then optionally, you can pick up our SOAR product, which is called Splunk Phantom. So you do a lot of orchestration there to do manual security tasks, right? Can now be done in Phantom. And then also dovetails in level 4, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So we're providing very deep analytics. Enterprise security is on the top right corner of the Magic Quadrant from Gartner. And that's why a lot of our our tier one defense contractors use us for that, is because it's simple to use, it's scalable, and it works exactly what they need. It meets all of their compliance requirements at the same time. So there's no finagling of practices in the CMMC and mapping that to to enterprise security stuff as well. So at the end of the day, our goal is really to get the data in the Splunk, right? So you can meet those practice requirements, right? So there's 170 plus controls through level 5. And then we want to make sure that everybody can monitor and measure that as time goes on, right? So Splunk can be configured to do periodic reporting, right? To adhere to the NIST language. So if it's something critical, we can set to, hey, give me a consolidated report every day. Let's say, successful or failed logons. Or if that's a KPI is to measure the, let's say number of failed logons, you can set a threshold in Splunk as well. Say if it's more than, X and Y amount of time, send me an alert, because that might be indicative of a brute force attack, for example, right? And the tracking and reporting aspect of that, this is where you can go in and look at your compliance statuses for all the controls. But also too, is when your CMMC assessor shows up, this is the beauty of this, and as Bruce will show later, is it allows, you can plop them down in front of Splunk, give them a login as an assessor, and they'll be able to rip through this very quickly, right, with very little questions asked. Nobody's ever said a compliance check was going to be, easy and painless and not time consuming, right? But now it can be, right? And you'll see what that looks like. The last is the advanced maturity. So enterprise security is our, the top SIEM product in the industry. So you'll be able to have that. So you have better security posture, right? Much lower risk. And if you decide to adopt our Splunk Phantom platform, you'll be able to then do automation. So you're saving a lot of time. Your FTEs will be able to utilize their time more wisely and in more concentrated parts of the organization, right? And also this will dovetail into other levels of the CMMC as well. And next slide, please. So talking about going through the Splunk product stack and mapping that to CMMC levels, level 1 and 2 is, it's a heavy uplift, right? So just to be clear, with the CMMC, you can't get to level 3 or any levels without passing the prior levels, right? So your assessors go through, look at level 1, check off the boxes, level 2, so on and so forth. What we have done is we've dovetailed the Splunk product stack to meet and map to those CMMC requirements very well. So let's say for level 3, enterprise security, it's our advanced SIEM product, like I said, so it affords you a lot of automation there from correlation searches. We have a risk framework that's built into it. So what effectively what that means is that a particular notable event or a cybersecurity issue has a risk value to it. So you have multiple, let's say, failed logons, but because of the risk value, an analyst can easily prioritize just by looking at a number, which one they should prioritize first. So failed logons could be for a non-essential, let's say, workstation, right? That has, on a particular VLAN, maybe the username has very low privileges, so they can't do any harm. But what if it's a, domain admin trying to, log into a production database server that might store CUI data, for example, right? There's still the two same fundamental, brute force login alerts, but now the analyst can say, all right, well, this one's a lot more important than the other one and concentrate their efforts there. We've also found is going to up-leveling from 3 to 4 is actually an easy transition, right? When we look at that, it is an extra 26 practices. Half of those practices map to our Splunk Phantom product. The other half of those map back to enterprise security. The last 25% really is just a few data sources and reports. But what we have found in practice is that if you bring in all the data sources required for levels 1, 2, and 3, they still map to level 4 and level 5. So effectively, just by adopting, let's say, just Phantom, you can get to level 4 levels, right? So you can go like what we consider like a +1 on the level, so you can actually do that. So you have, if we look at the CMMC perspective, yes, you can then bid on solicitations for level 4 and up, right? When they say, you need level 4 and up, you can bid on those contractors. You're the higher dollar ones, more lucrative ones. But also too, is if it's a level 3, but you already have level 4, obviously you can still bid on those. And that might actually help you from a competitive advantage when it comes to the bidding process, right? But I would say that's one aspect of the business. But when it comes to the internal side, right, you also want to look at it from the security process. So you have a lot more time savings with Phantom and enterprise security, right? So you have much lower risk and a much higher security posture. So I would argue to go to at least look at Phantom level 4 from the security aspect of the organization first, but then look at it as an auxiliary benefit of the bidding process to bid on more lucrative contracts, at that point as well too. And also from a competitive standpoint, maybe your competitors are at level 3 and you're at level 4, and that may be a deciding factor in the bidding process. Right. Next slide, please. All right. So from from the solution advantages that we provide, again, we talked about our SIM product, our SOAR product, right? What Splunk does is a data platform. We also need to bring in, more of the out-of-the-box experience as well too, right? So when we've looked around in the industry, I like to look at our competitors and what my current customers have within their networks. And if you don't believe us, you go and Google this, type in any SIM product in the term CMMC, right? For us at Splunk, you'll find a ton of different blog posts. We actually have a webinar, an app. It's there. Our tier one defense contractors have already adopted this. They have it already implemented today, and they're already using it. Any other SIM product that you look at and you type in CMMC, if they don't have an app or it doesn't exist or it's coming soon, you might want to reevaluate those aspects of it as well, right? So our goal at Splunk and with TekStream is to give a soup to nuts, everything from data ingest to CMMC assessment support in one continuous journey, right? So you're not picking and choosing different products and partners and hoping they all work together, right? TekStream is a Splunk Elite partner, so that has a lot of skin in the game, and they have a lot of experience in working with compliance and security as well. So, and last, let's look at our customers, right? So I had mentioned we have a lot of the pretty much all of the tier 1 defense contractors use this today. Splunk is heavily ingrained into the DoD space as well. Not to give it away, but I've seen Splunk in tents in Afghanistan for warfighters, down to even ships and and the fighter jets that are out there as well too. So soup to nuts, Splunk is everywhere. These other SIM products may not be in those locations for a couple of reasons. One, they don't scale to the DoD and defense contractors, and also two is from their security compliance standpoints, right? What they can provide their customers might be much to be desired as well too.
No, not to mention, Paul, your FedRAMP and GovCloud environments as well. So,
correct. Yeah, we're one of the few SIM providers out there that are IL2 ready, right? And IL4 should be coming later this year as well, if it needs to be there. So, all right, well, there we go. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Bruce.
Oh, no, thank you, Paul. We'll take actually, I think it's worth very quickly showing a bit of the compliance solution itself, because it becomes pretty apparent, the power of the solution when you simply just walk through what's included. If you're familiar with the Splunk platform, what is provided here are kind of dashboards, if you will, that pull together each of the practices into domains. But what is under the covers and that is not readily apparent is all of the power of not just Splunk as a big data platform, that allows us to collect any data source and ask it any question, but also the SIM product and the SOAR product and the UBA product. If you're familiar with those, Splunk being one of the, being the top SIM in the marketplace, as well as providing a premier SOAR solution, which is the automated response. And obviously, if we're talking level 4 and above, being responsive to CUI controls is fundamentally part of the solution. And then UBA and obviously tracking user behavior analytics relative to security threats, layers on top of that as well. So that's kind of what's under the covers. This solution, the CMMC solution, makes it really look very simple. The biggest challenge, I think, for us in implementing it is simply gathering together the necessary data from each one of those domains or each one of the practices, individual practices. You can see here from a domain perspective, each one of those domains is broken down into practices or controls, practices in the CMMC parlance. And when we look at it, individual practices, those are dynamically instantiated, configured based on really what level it is we're targeting. So 130, obviously, for level 3, 156 at level 4, and the full 171 at level 5. All of those are, turned on and off with that high-level configuration. When we drill down to any one of these given practices, obviously, we are pulling data back from all of these different sources. One of the powerful aspects of Splunk is not just our ability to, on the fly, pull back any data and apply a schema at search time, so we can change our mind or reclassify data on the fly. It's stored in its raw format, but it's also the ability to normalize all of that data, put it all into data models. In this case, we're looking at authentication events across every tier. So every source that does authentication within your enterprise, whether it's a firewall or a database or an application, all of those tiers and all of those devices have different authentication events. And all of that is pulled together and normalized within the Splunk platform, and then obviously put into the right context for, in this case, unsuccessful login attempts. The same is true of individual sources like, let's say, your badge reader data. To the extent that you're not, let's say you don't have access to badge reader data, what we typically look at then is, where are the gaps in terms of your data usage? Do you have a username, for instance, at a very detailed level, or at a high level, do you have a missing badge reader data? So if there is actually a gap, then we would go back and look at augmenting that with process. We are also, within each one of these environments, tracking, really with this CMMC solution, instilling a culture of compliance. So we're tracking, or able to create audit entries for each one of the practices and mark whether it's compliant, non-compliant, follow up for review, set a date, et cetera. And all of that is kind of collected on an ongoing basis then at an executive level, what those audit entries are and whether we are being compliant and non-compliant. Hopefully when you're getting the auditors in is not the time to discover that you have a gap in your POAM process. You'd like to know that up front. And obviously we're establishing the monitoring, establishing the compliance for a C3PO audit up front, and then monitoring that compliance over time, so that it really helps to guide an auditor through the overall attestation process. And then, of course, we're tracking over time any solution activity usage, to making sure that people are actively using these practices over time, and we're tracking that as well. So that really was, in essence, the solution itself. Let me jump back to the slides, and we'll talk about how it's implemented really quick. So in terms of our approach, the tool itself allows us to take a very proactive methodology, if you will, that's very different from if you're dealing with other services vendors, other solution vendors around CMMC. It's a very different approach for us because of the capability fundamentally of the technology. TekStream, as an organization, we're white label Splunk professional services. Obviously, we do professional services for Splunk when they rely on partners. And we handle the majority of the Splunk on-demand services as well. So if you're familiar with on-demand and you've worked with Splunk before, these are the types of issues that users of Splunk have that transcend maybe your typical customer support issue. So when you need an admin or an expert on a stick, that's us in most cases. We also provide outsourced services for managing environments for some relatively well-known companies, for managed services for Splunk, as well as outsourced security services. We're pretty experienced, obviously, in the CMMC solution. There's a variety of different compliance solutions. We're talking about CMMC today, but there's a ton of compliance solutions for just about every PCI, PII, PHI category you can name that come from Splunk. Most of them are on Splunk base. It just so happens that this CMMC solution is internal to Splunk, and they've allowed TekStream to leverage that in the context of solving CMMC problems. We're all certified, and obviously our experience in terms of implementing this is really focusing on reducing the time to compliance. Typically, we approach this problem with a readiness assessment up front. Really, that is a matter of understanding your data sources, what's available, and where the known gaps are in terms of going in. What your overall compliance needs are, what your threat service looks like, what use cases support that. And that's pretty much something we can do in a very foreshortened amount of time in order to get implementing, because obviously we want to implement first and do the gap analysis second. Normally, when you deal with CMMC and you look at the service providers out there, they take the approach that says, let's analyze your SSP POAM maturity. Let's look at, what is your overall objectives, and let's map that to the processes, and let's look at the various tools that will satisfy those processes, each of the practices in turn. The difference with Splunk as a platform, it allows us to really implement a comprehensive solution that gathers all of that data together. And to be honest, if you do a gap analysis up front, it's very hard to foresee what those gaps are going to be until you actually implement something, even on a detailed level. I know that Jason can talk to this. There are some sources maybe that don't have a MAC address or a user address where you expected them. So really, if you drop into analysis first, you're going to spend an awful lot of time doing that analysis, and you'll still uncover gaps after you've implemented a solution. So for us, by looking at the solution first and then addressing some of the gap analysis second, it really allows a foreshortened time to attestation, or to compliance, I should say. So apply the policy where you find the gaps. So you implement the solution to pull in all of the data that's available and categorize it, and then go back and practice by practice, understand where those gaps exist, and then augment those with policy or SOPs. Avoid analysis paralysis, if I said, incremental spend to level up. So as in with the case with NPR, they were looking at NIST standards, 171 standards first, then level 3, and then eventually level 4, and doing that incrementally as you gain familiarity with the tool and the solution. So obviously we talked a little bit about allowable expense, something that you certainly want to look into for your organization as you're implementing CMMC. We are looking into kind of not just the compliance monitoring piece, which we showed briefly there, but also leveraging the results of CMMC solution, this solution, into the generation of SSPs and POAMs, because it's very hard, as you know, if you're dealing with it, developing SSPs, trying to find the boundary for your organization is challenging enough. But being able to say, okay, here's the list of hardware, here's the software components, here are the users with admin privileges, here are the allowable ports, all of that can be generated from this CMMC solution. We're gathering all of that data. So we're actually looking at ways to generate some of these documents and SOPs from the solution itself. And obviously, as we mentioned before, all this can be implemented in a FedRAMP GovCloud environment. So our CMMC journey really starts with the assessment, the core plus security implementation, which includes core Splunk and the SIEM tool on top of that. Typically that's enterprise security, but we can do InfoSec, and that takes a little bit more customization to do it that way, but we can. And then CMMC, the solution implementation, the gap analysis next, the process documentation, whether it's the generation of SSP POAMs or whether it's just constructing those, and then ongoing compliance, right? And that kind of is the standard compliance regardless of what level we're targeting. So baseline CMMC includes all of those kind of early assessment and core components. If we're talking about level 3, then we're talking about layering in the security tools. We're talking about, obviously the starting point for 130 use cases. We do some upfront use case analysis of security use cases and correlation searches in order to guide where those alerts need to happen, and not just security, but compliance alerts as well. Level 4, we're looking at really how do we make this environment proactive and responsive by layering in the SOAR tool, the automation tool, to automate response with Phantom, and certainly if you have time, worth taking a look at because if you're looking at the overall OODA loop from a security perspective, it's the second half of that loop. Phantom is what closes the process, automates the process of response to any given threat, and a useful tool for sure, regardless of whether you're doing CMMC. And then obviously level 5, we're layering in user behavior analytics, another 15 use cases. And at level 5, then you've got a requirement for a business plan that is appropriate for level 5 as well. You've got to draft that. In terms of the solution packages, some kind of rough numbers to implementing, the solutions in terms of services and our bundles. These are kind of the rough figures, if you will. The CMMC app itself typically takes us 3 weeks really to implement, but there are obviously predicates for each one of these levels that have to do with implementing the core infrastructure solution for Splunk Enterprise and Enterprise Security and Phantom and UBA. So these are kind of the levels of the bundles that we have together. Obviously, some of the effort will vary for each one of these. It will vary based on the number of data sources typically that you're dealing with. The rest of it is pretty consistent. Obviously, there are services that we offer to augment these, to generate SSPs and POAMs and some of the policies and procedures that we look at in the gap analysis phase. So one of the final points I'll make is that there are a lot of companies. I know Jason talked briefly about NPR's intentions longer term that look at allowable cost as an opportunity, as a means of leveling up. So obviously, if you're part of the 85% crowd that's going for level 3, you certainly stand out if you're able to attest at a level 4 level. You certainly garner a few more contracts by saying level 4. There's also in the allowable cost model, the ability to defray, as I said, that phantom piece, that automated response piece, which has all sorts of benefits in the context of responding to alerts on a timely basis, on an automated basis, and doing so consistently and doing all of that automated triage has a ton of benefits other than just simply level 4. So if you can defray some of that cost in the context of allowable cost, it certainly is a lucrative opportunity. That really is, level 4 has a lot of benefits in that context. This is our NASCAR slide. We deal with companies across the continuum. And so that means smaller companies that have one security officer that need our help, as well as very, very large companies like Chick-fil-A and FedEx that have very established security practices. And I think that the important statistic for us is that our repeat business stands at 97%. So where we do an engagement, we like to keep a partner. So we have a pretty high renewal rate. That's all we were prepared to talk about today. Any questions? I did have kind of a question for Jeff, honestly. What do you guys generate CUI? What is your perspective on level 4 compliance in that context? Jason?
Hey, yeah, sorry. So for us, we don't. So as part of the risk management framework, as far as working and implementing the NIST 800, 171, and CMMC, you go through. There's a FIPS assessment, and through that, we went through that, and yeah, we're not a generator, and we're a moderate level, and so we don't necessarily have to go to a 4 or apply.
So how are you viewing that level 4 opportunity? Does it kind of track with what I was describing there?
Yeah, so I think for us, we get the 3, and then we're going to take a break, and then think about how, and for us, for our size and I know there's some requirements as far as monitoring and how much monitoring you would have to have the 24/7 monitoring. That's something that we would need to to figure out. So there's a couple of things we have to figure out, and I think probably even do a little bit of analysis of what's a cost to value analysis to figure out if that's something that makes sense.
Fair, it makes sense. Cool. Thank you. And Paul, I had one question for you, man. What do you feel like the challenges are that we're avoiding in the audit process or the attestation process with this solution?
Yeah, I would say that for the most part, when it comes to the actual assessment, right, the biggest anxieties that the CISOs I've talked to, a lot of the security folks at many organizations over the last several months about this is, hey, this is great. You guys have Splunk. We can get the data in, right? There's also a lot of other auxiliary benefits like doing IT ops and business ops or whatever with that. But it's really like, right, when our assessor shows up, how can we be sure on the first go around, or how much can you guarantee that we can get the level, assessed before they leave? And I tell them, to be frank, look, we can't, even with Splunk and TekStream working together with you to get that assessment, but hopefully we can get it done the first go around, right? The beauty of having Splunk Elite partner like TekStream on board during the assessment, right, is that if there's something like the assessor's like, well, I don't like the way this report looks, great, then they can, TekStream can go in there and fiddle around and get it done, right? Because we can't expect, especially new Splunk customers, to be very proficient at it out of the gate, right? Because there's a million other things they have to do with it. They're doing security stuff, might need some IT ops, right? So that's where we help fill in those gaps, right? So if we're lucky, then they can be fixed before the assessor leaves. They can kind of look at it again. All right, great, you're done. I mean, worst case, they say, hey, you're shooting for level 3. We're going to ding you on stuff on level 1 and 2, right? They'll be back 30, 60, 90 days to reassess, but have TekStream involved in terms of maybe it's a data source ingest, right? They're the experts at that from the Splunk perspective. Get that in there. Then they can redo the reports if needed, or sharpen up an SOP or an SSP, with the Splunk language or attributes in there. So it's very crystal clear to the assessor that everything's done. So that helps, leadership at companies say, all right, great, we can go ahead and proceed forward because now we have, everybody working in tandem to be successful, right? But again, I always look at it from a fact of, yes, the CMMC is important, it's a requirement, but look at it from the company's benefit, the organization's benefit from security, right? Of all the insights that you get into it.
I totally, one thing I would add to that, and just informally, like going through the audit process, is every auditor comes with their own agenda, right? Maybe you got an auditor that really understands McAfee, right? And they really love AV solutions. The one thing that I would say about this solution, just informally from a attestation process perspective, Paul, is that you're leading the auditor down a path. You're kind of weaving the boundaries of the story, and there aren't a ton of questions at the end. You know what I mean? It streamlines that process. So that's one of the really powerful things about having Splunk in one pane of glass to me.
Yeah. As a person who's a former Splunk customer, I had FSMA requirements, a former employer, and being audited, even a surprise audit, it's not fun. Even if it's scheduled, right? The anxieties, it's a huge pain in the butt for everybody involved. But as you guys can tell, looking at what Splunk is offering and how easy it is to look at and use, from the accreditation board's perspective, the way they're training the assessors to look at this, it maps directly back to the app. So they can rip through that's great. They can look at your SOPs, your SSPs, and look at Splunk, and it's easy for anybody to dovetail the Splunk outputs, the reports into those processes, and then the assessors are going to have a really good time getting this done, right? And any organization as well. Again, no organization ever said an audit was fast, simple, and easy. I think we're going to break that misconception now, right?
I think you're probably right.
Yep.
Hey guys, thank you so much for participating in this. It's been a blast to have you both on the same webinar, and I look forward to doing business with both of you in the future. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yep. Thanks for having me on, Bruce. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks.